I'm going to be sharing some, theory with you. So to some extent, I'm glad I have you early, where the caffeine is still kicking in. What we're going to be talking about this morning is the idea of influence and persuasion. And when I say theory, the reason why I say theory is because there's actually this is in a rich area of research. There's a lot of science behind it. And I want to share with you just a little bit of that science. Now, here at LBS, we believe very strongly that there's no point throwing theory at you if it's also not simultaneously practical to you. So while I'm going to be talking about these ideas of influence and persuasion and the science behind it, simultaneously I'm going to be giving you tons and tons of examples, right? Whether it's in the business world, whether it's in the real social world, just try and make these ideas come alive. The other thing about my style of sort of like teaching and being in front of a class is that I really don't know what to do if I'm just hearing myself talk endlessly. So I do hope and expect that you guys will participate along with me and bring in things that you think are pertinent as we talk about these ideas of influence and persuasion. So I think big picture, we all appreciate the idea of needing to influence people, right? So, many of you guys may be very senior in your organizations, and yes, it may be the case that you can go around just telling people to do something. But as you may well experience, telling somebody to do something might result in them just kind of complying with what it is that you want them to do, which is all fine and good, but it doesn't necessarily result in them being committed to what it is that you're thinking about wanting them to do and the course of action that you're pursuing. And as a result of that, these ideas around influence and persuasion are really, really key because they move beyond getting somebody to just simply comply with what it is that you're requesting to actually being truly committed to the course that you're setting for them, such that when you're not in the room, when you're away at LBS attending a course or at a meeting in a different organization, these individuals are still doing the things that you want them to do. And that, in some sense, is a big reason why we have these ideas and want to think about these ideas of influence and persuasion. As I said, there's a very, very large area of research around this, and I want to share with you just 6 basic principles around how it is that we interact with people. Right, so this work has really been influenced by a guy called Robert Cialdini. He's a social psychologist, and he came up with these ideas, these 6 principles, and thinks of them as these sort of like interpersonal principles of influence. And that's kind of what I'm going to be doing this morning, sharing these ideas with you. So if we start off just kind of at the top and work our way down, if we think about the idea of reciprocity is this very, very powerful sense of that when I do somebody a favor, they feel a compunction to do a favor back for me in return. I'm sure that you can think of many, many instances in your own lives when you're trying to get somebody to do something, rather than just making request after request after request, it may actually be easier to do them a little favor first, and then all of a sudden they're actually much more likely to do something back for you in return, right? So in negotiations, we know this very, very well, that if, for instance, we want the other side to share information about their priorities, actually, a really, really good way of trying to start that process is to share a little bit of information with them. When we do that, that kickstarts this process of reciprocity, and then hopefully, and usually, people then feel a sense of a duty to respond in kind and give you some information back in return. I have this thing here. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What this is? It's very popular in the US. So these are like mailing labels, so return address labels. And I don't know how many of you guys have experienced this, but sometimes charities will send these out. So the gentleman is at the back is nodding. So tell me a little bit about this.
I remember when I lived in the U.S. that we would get those labels with their names and addresses, look great, and then after you get that as a gift, they invite you to make a contribution to the charity.
Yeah, and this is exactly, they're trying to work on this principle of reciprocity, okay? Did you ever donate out of curiosity?
Yes.
Okay, so you're more generous than I was. When I was in the U.S., I was always a starving student, so I would get these in the mail, and starving student as my excuse, I never donated. But this is the principle that they're working on, right? So they're printing out these return address little stickers, and obviously this is incredibly cheap for them to do. You can only imagine that all they need is a color printer. They need to have bought some stickers from Office Depot, and then they're printing them out en masse, and then they send it to you. And now you'll receive this thing, and oh my goodness, it's a personalized gift. How thoughtful of them. And then they kick in this idea of reciprocity, and now you feel a slight need to do them a favor in return. There are many other examples of this. So, this idea of like, is it really a free gift in the mail? I mentioned this idea of reciprocity in negotiations, right? Giving some information to get information. But I'll give you another example. So this is a study that was done some years back, and they were trying to figure out how to get people to respond to surveys. So I don't know how many of you guys either have to do customer surveys or even in-house surveys where you're trying to get your employees to respond to you, but this is an interesting one. So this company was interested in trying to understand, not this company, sorry, these bunch of researchers were interested in trying to understand how to get people to respond to surveys. So what did they do? They had two groups of people, and one group of people, they sent out this survey and they said, hey, we'd like for you to complete the survey. It's really important for us. You're all part of this organization. We want feedback from you. And if you complete the survey and send it back to us, we will send you a check for $25, okay? I mean, $25 is, it's not a small amount of money. It's a decent amount of money. You know, I could get a very nice lunch or a simple dinner for that. Okay, I can work with that. And then in the other condition, what they did was they sent out the survey and they said, hey, we'd really, really like for people to complete the survey. Here's a $5 check. It's yours to keep whether you complete the survey or not, but we'd really like for you to complete the survey. People were much more likely to complete and return the survey in this condition. Now, cynics in the room are probably going, hang on a second, I've just sent out like a lot of $5 checks. Am I in a lot of trouble now? Interestingly, no. People in this condition tended to be honest. They tended not to cash the check unless they actually completed the survey. So this idea of reciprocity was, one, more effective, and two, more cost efficient than this idea of, hey, you do something for me, then I do something back for you in return, right? So this idea of reciprocity is quite powerful. Any ideas that you guys can think of around reciprocity? Ideas of how you've seen it play out in your lives or in your organizational lives?
I guess whenever you get promoted, it's kind of credit of trust, because what got you here will not necessarily get you there. And if you get promoted, sometimes in some situations it may mean that you have this credit of trust from your boss or shareholders or whatever that you have to justify, basically. So that was my personal situation.
Yeah, no, I can see that, right? So interestingly enough, you've done the work to get the promotion, but even then they're giving you this promotion, and now there's this sense that, oh my goodness, I really, really need to do good by them for putting their trust in me. Okay, thank you. Anything else that you guys can think of? Any other examples that you can think of? I'll give you a funny example, but this also gets a little bit at how, as we start thinking about how to use influence, it's also, I think, interesting to think about how it is that we make sure that it's not being used against us, okay? So this one's a funny example that puts those two ideas together. I'm Singaporean originally. I know that my accent is now completely muddled. I lived in the US for a long time. I lived here for a long time. I don't know what I sound like now. But in Singapore, one of the things that we celebrate is Chinese New Year. And during Chinese New Year, and this is a very Singaporean custom. It's not even necessarily a more broadly Chinese custom. But in Singapore, when you celebrate Chinese New Year, you go visit all your friends and family, which is the same across China. But the unique thing in Singapore is that when you do this, you bring 2 mandarin oranges to your host's home, okay? And it's 2 mandarin oranges because the word for mandarin oranges in Chinese sounds like gold, sounds like fortune. So in a very Chinese way, they're playing on this linguistic thing to say, I'm bringing you fortune, okay? So what happens is that you go to your host's home, you bring 2 oranges with you, you give them to them, and they now immediately feel the need to do you a favor back in return. So what do? They go to their kitchen, put those 2 oranges down, take 2 oranges, and give them back to you. So you started with 2 oranges. Now, 5 minutes later, you're back with 2 oranges. So then you repeat this process as you visit the houses, right? So you visit the next house. Hey, you still have 2 oranges. So you give it to your new host. Your new host gives you new oranges back in return. You still have 2 oranges. So you keep doing this process of giving favors and them reciprocating, such that at the end of the day, you still have 2 oranges. You started it with 2 oranges. At the end of it, might not be the same 2 oranges, but you still have 2 oranges. And it really is a very ritualized version of this reciprocity process, okay? But it's also how it is that people are trying to null out the effects, right? So if people are trying to do you favors and curry favor with you, this is an instance of how it is that you diffuse these reciprocity influence tactics. Can you guys think of how else you might, try and diffuse these tactics if they're being used against you?
I suppose if you're Scotch, you get for your 2 oranges, you give 2 lumps of coal.
Thank you.
So that's at New Year, isn't it?
It's New Year, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
It's the Hockney thing.
So okay, for those who are not in on the details, tell me a little bit about how this.
Well, I remember when I was a kid, we used to have a tradition that you went outside the house with a piece of coal, and you came back inside the house when the clock struck 12.
Okay.
To welcome the new year. So
okay.
That's what the gentleman's referring to as the coal. Am I right?
Yeah. You actually sort of bring in a lump of coal.
Okay.
Speaking as a Scot, I think it's called first footing.
Oh,
So I did
yes.
first fit across the.
That's it. First
the
fit
door.
across
I
the
see.
door.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think over time it evolved into also something.
Of course it did. Good evolution of a tradition. Okay. Other ideas of how you can see this sort of like if somebody is trying to use this influence tactic against you, how you would try and null out these sorts of reciprocity influence tactics.
Pay for it or decline to accept it.
So you could pay for it, you could decline to accept it. But my guess is that in an organizational situation, well, in most situations, that could come across as kind of rude, right? So yes, you can try that, okay? But be careful that you don't offend your counterpart. Other things that you could do.
Which is classically, if someone's bought you lunch, you get lunch next time. It's something as simple as
Absolutely, right? So there's just a sense of tit for tat. You know, down the line, I remember it's my turn to pay for lunch or dinner or whatever, or drinks. Yeah. Somebody had a...
Sorry.
Yes.
I may have misunderstood the question. How do we protect ourselves?
Yeah.
Trying to use reciprocity?
Yeah, so exactly, right?
Accept with grace.
Okay.
Be aware that that's what they're trying to do.
Yes.
And steel yourself mentally to go
Steel
against
mentally.
social norms.
I don't dispute this. So in some sense, as we go through all of these different types of influence tactics, that is the advice that will be consistent for many of them. But I'm going to present to you some research that basically says, you know what, sometimes that doesn't work as well as we'd like to think that it would. And in that regard, it's therefore even better to have other ways of tackling them. My guess is that, for instance, within an organizational setting, many of you guys will have rules within your organizations that say, I can accept this gift, but not this gift, a certain value of gift, or there's certain things that I can't do. These organizational boundaries are there in some sense, because sometimes just us saying, I understand what they're doing and I'm not going to fall prey to it, is not necessarily sufficient. So some things that we can do, as I said, you could try and reject the gift, but it's not necessarily easy, or it could be seen as impolite. We could be exactly this, right? Accept the gift, but kind of be wary of what's going on. And again, that can work. Don't get me, I'm not trying to say that it won't work, but I'm just saying that it's not as easy as it might sometimes be. Whenever this happens to me, I generally like to have a ready excuse. You know, I go into a shop and try and buy, and I'm trying to buy something, and they offer me a coffee or whatever it might be. Thanks, I just had breakfast. I don't need anything right now. That doesn't necessarily stop them from still trying to really like foist the stuff on me. But at least if I have a ready excuse, that potentially helps me to overcome their influence tactics. That's reciprocity. Let me give you some other ideas to think about. Another tactic that Cialdini talks about is this idea of commitment and consistency. The idea of commitment and consistency is that once we make a decision and we head down a particular path of action, we feel the need to be consistent with that course of action. And this can happen even if we get negative feedback about our actions. And it's particularly effective if the commitments are done sort of like in a very active public way, right? You can imagine, right? So if you stand up and immediately start saying things about, you know, I am going to, you know, New Year's is coming and I'm going to make a resolution to start going to the gym. If you make that sort of like public commitment, it becomes much more effective in ensuring that you become consistent with that course of action down the road. So I have another example, a bumper sticker, right? So not as common here again, but again, this is potentially a bit of a US example. But when I was in the US, I remember seeing bumper stickers for every which cause that was out there. But beyond that, for children's schools, right? Always like proud parent of, you know, whatever school. Why do people do that? Why are these, you know, bumper stickers so prevalent? And then come election time, also very, very prevalent. Why are they out there?
Does it say something about your personal brand? So it defines what you present to the world.
Okay. And then what happens when that brand comes knocking on your door for money, or you know, or your time commitments or something like that? You've defined, you're exactly right, you're spot on. You've defined yourself as that is part of your brand. So when that brand comes saying, I need your help in terms of time, whether it's for your children's school or money for saving the whales or whatever it might be, you're much, much more likely to do that, right? Another example, and this one is, I like this example because it really kind of combines these different, a couple of these different influence tactics. And one of the things to think about if you're trying to go around influencing and persuading other people is that if you can tap into multiple of these principles, whatever you're doing becomes ever more powerful, because it fundamentally means that it's leveraging off of different psychological ideas simultaneously. Okay, so example. How many of you guys have been, let's say on the plane, and you're reading some sort of magazine magazine and you see in the magazine this little tear-off thing that says you can get 3 weeks or 3 issues free of this magazine, and then after that, you know, you have to stop paying. How many of you guys have seen that? Yeah? How many of you guys have signed up for that? Okay, and tell me a little bit about...
I did remember to cancel.
You did remember to cancel. Well done, you. So how or why did you remember to cancel?
I put a note in my diary.
You put
to do it, so, because otherwise I wouldn't have done it.
But this to a large extent is this idea of like commitment and consistency. But there's also reciprocity, going back to what we just talked about, right? They're giving you 3 free issues or whatever it might be, and then there is also the hope that, hey, I'm reading this. I'm reading, you know, whether it's National Geographic or The Economist or whatever it might be. And especially, come on, let's say The Economist, okay? I'm reading it now. Wow, I'm feeling so smart for reading The Economist, okay? And you know what? You know what? I want to be that smart person who reads The Economist. So when it comes time to renew my subscription, to actually start paying for my subscription, I'm quite likely to do it because I've coded myself as a person who reads The Economist. But honestly speaking, I don't know about you guys, but The Economist is like, comes out, what, once a week? It takes me a month to read each issue, right? So there's this like giant backlog of Economists sitting on my desk, and I'm still shelling out money because I've coded myself as somebody who reads The Economist. Other examples that I have for you for this idea of commitment and consistency. So we talked about bumper stickers. Petitions are very similar in nature. Has anybody heard of the foot in door technique? I hear laughter, so I'm hoping would our new guest who's just joined us feel comfortable sharing a little bit with? No, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, but you were laughing, so do you want to tell us a little bit about this foot in door technique?
Make sure you're on the inside before people know actually what you're talking about. Roughly.
Kind of, yeah. Anybody else familiar with this tactic?
It's from brush salesmen. Try and deliver, so if you're selling brushes,
yes.
You're somewhere.
Yeah.
You have a suitcase of brushes. You need to knock on the door and get inside with the housewife on this week, ideally. You do that by saying, I brought this brush for you. Would you like to see what else I've got?
Yeah. So thank you. That's pretty much this idea that it came about when people used to go door to door selling stuff, whether it's brushes or whatever it might be. And the idea is simply that, hey, if I can get my foot in, I can get the rest of myself through the door, okay? Because once you've committed to letting me just, you know, get in a little bit, I can open that door further. There was a study done in, and this is an old study, but it's a beautiful study, done in the 1960s to examine this foot in door technique, and I have to tell you about it because it's really, it's kind of amazing. So this was done in California, and they were interested in getting people to put a big, ugly sign saying "Drive carefully" on these people's front gardens. Okay, and they were kind of curious about how to get people to comply with this request. And so, in one condition, they knocked on a bunch of doors in a neighborhood and said, "Hi, we're very interested in people driving carefully in your neighborhood. Would you be willing to put this big sign, which was very, very ugly, on your front garden?" People looked at the sign and were like, not so much, okay? 17% of the people here said that they were willing to put this big, ugly sign on their front gardens. The other condition, they knocked on the door and said, "Hi, we're very interested in people driving carefully in your neighborhood. Would you be willing to put this little sticker saying, 'Drive carefully' on your window?" Everybody said yes. I mean, this is a neighborhood, people had children, they wanted people to drive carefully. So absolutely, everybody said yes. 2 weeks later, knock, 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 would you be willing to put this big, ugly sign saying, "Drive carefully" on your front lawn? 76% of the people said yes, right? Versus 17 from the other condition. So think about a time when if you're trying to get somebody to do something for you and their initial response is no, no, no. Think about whether you can make a smaller ask initially, because that may be the way to try and get them to do the big ask later on. This is this idea of commitment and consistency. How do we prevent from, well, I'll give you one more idea. There's a very, very powerful area of literature that talks about something called escalation of commitment. Okay, escalation of commitment refers to a phenomenon where if people make investments, typically money, but also time or energy, in a particular course of action, and then they get negative feedback, people typically reinvest in this failing course of action because they feel the need to be consistent with their initial choice, right? So from an economic standpoint, this is considered irrational. It's considered throwing good money after bad. You're supposed to ignore sunk costs, and people are honoring sunk costs. And this escalation phenomenon has been used to explain anything ranging from R&D investments to commitment to personnel, right? So you hire somebody, they're not working out quite right. Well, we could ask them to exit, or we could give them more training. Well, let's give them more training and more training and more training, even though maybe we should be thinking about exiting them gracefully. It's been used to explain the Vietnam War. It's been used to explain even things like the amount of time that basketball players have on court. So these analyses try to control for how much, how good these players were. But even then, if these basketball players were recruited with a big lump sum of money, they ended up having more playing time on the court. Understanding all of this, how do we try and prevent some of these things from happening? How do we ensure that the decisions that we're making are good decisions and not biased by these initial commitments that we make?
On the escalation of commitment, what might you looking, giving yourself a stop loss position, looking at data rather than general, how do you feel about the situation?
Agree. So being very concrete and objective in your data. I will say that research has found that the way that we look at the data becomes biased too because of this, right? So I hear you and I agree with that. The stop loss is like this bottom line, this reservation price, this reminder that I need to stop, which I also agree with. So this is very difficult to prevent, and you need to try many things. So these are good, but may not be sufficient. Other things that we can do.
Bounce it off someone else, work with someone else.
Very good idea, right? So what's happening is that if I make the initial choice to invest resources in a course of action, I'm the one who feels as though I need to be consistent. But if I have a neutral third party make the reinvestment decision, so a colleague who can help me with my thinking, help me analyze the data, that can be very helpful because this colleague is not burdened by the same need to be consistent with initial commitments. Other things that you can think about. This is one of those where we say ignore sunk costs, right? So this gentleman was very, very rational and say, well, we need to kind of understand that these things are happening to us and we just need to say no. And my dissertation from many, many, many years ago was looking at exactly this idea. When it comes to these sunk costs, can we just say, you know what, we just need to ignore them. We just need to understand that they're there and ignore them. The problem is that we don't go around saying, ooh, let me look out for sunk costs. Ooh, let me beware of sunk costs. And then the next thing you know, the sunk costs hit you, and then you feel this need to be consistent. This is why these principles are as potentially tricky as they are. Yeah, so some ideas there. Let me give you more things to think about. So we've talked about reciprocity. We've talked about commitment and consistency. There's this idea of social proof, which is this notion that when the course of action is, please, sir.
Sorry, can I just going back onto the last one?
Yeah.
How do you diffuse a third party committing, where you're seeing that they're committing to something and you want to try and diffuse a third party situation, committing to something which you don't like the look of? And just as throwing an example out, my wife, who might say,
now.
But what's interesting is, I mean, this is something that happens in all our relationships, and actually I can see when she says something out loud, I'm like, damn, that's a public commitment. She's going to kind of reinforce that. So are there any tips you've got for us, which is how do you diffuse that situation?
So without asking for more specifics, which I'm not sure I can deal with, I would say that you want to try and find a graceful exit, right? So a graceful exit, a graceful way to back out from that commitment. But the other thing too is to find an alternative. So a lot of these types of commitment and consistency things, in your head it becomes go, no go. It becomes invest, not invest. It becomes let the person in, don't let the person in. But if we can think of an alternative path, an alternative acceptable path, then all of a sudden the thinking becomes different and it's not so binary, it's not so, oh my God, I have to do this to be consistent. There's, wait, hang on a second, maybe there's this alternative thing that I can do instead. So without the gory details, those are my suggestions.
You would suggest those alternative paths?
Yes, in a face-saving manner.
Yeah.
For you as well, probably. Yeah. Okay, so social proof. Social proof is this thing that when the course of action is not completely clear, we very often look to other people around us as to what it is that we should do, and we follow them, right? We're much more likely to follow people who are like us, who are in close proximity to us, and this can result in a lot of interesting things. So the difficulty with doing these sessions is that I have so many examples to share with you, and I'm like picking and choosing amongst my kids, but this one I have to choose. So laugh tracks, do we know what those are? The canned laughter, right? So in a lot of TV shows, a lot of these sitcoms, there's this canned laughter in the background. Who here finds it annoying? Yeah, Okay, but why do sitcoms, why do the studios do this? Because it works, and it's particularly effective if the show is ambiguously funny. If somebody else is laughing, you find that funny too. So it's just something to keep in mind. How do we get somebody to do something? Well, tell them everybody else is doing it. And we see this happening a lot of times, right? It's like, this happens with trends. It happens with a lot in marketing, where they try and say, look, everybody likes this. And when that happens, there's a sense of, oh, I must like it too. Within a more business example, these sorts of social proof ideas have a lot to do with both auctions themselves. So if somebody's bidding, right, you're not very sure whether this has value or not. If somebody's bidding, okay, you bid too. But then as a result of that, it has implications for things like M&A. So my husband's a banker, and what do they try and do? If you can get one interested party, two interested party, you're done. There will now be a whole slew of people who are interested in buying this company because these ideas of social proof kick in. Please.
Building on that, also when you do use some quotes or paraphrase somebody else, you're trying to get this social proof to say it's not only me speaking, but also there's a quote or somebody else did it or following the same track. So you're trying to show that your idea is not only yours.
Yes, absolutely, right. And then very often too, it goes beyond social proof, but we pair it with this idea of we pick the people whose quotes we use, right? It may be a celebrity or somebody very cool because we want to be like these people. So it's again pairing different types of influence tactics together, but absolutely. Yeah.
In a meeting with a Japanese executives of a Japanese company, and if you want to put forward a new idea, the best thing to do is just talk to each of them before the meeting and present the new idea to each of them. Get them to think that the idea is great and present it as new to the whole meeting, and then there's more chance that it's going to be accepted.
Yeah, and
my wife
so thank you for this. But it's not just. I mean, I know that it may be particularly relevant in a Japanese culture, but it's true the world over, right? If you're trying to sell an idea, trying to sell it first time in front of a big group is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Whereas if you can get a bunch of people offline to buy into your idea, then to hopefully publicly support, one or two of them to publicly support you in the big room, you're much more likely then to get a momentum of people who are voting in your favor. Again, bringing in things like Brexit where it becomes pertinent. How do we prevent some of these things from affecting us? Unfortunately, the research doesn't necessarily have great ideas here, so we just have to kind of say, look, you need to understand your motivations for doing something. Don't just follow the crowd, right? And now when I say this for those of you guys who have kids, I mean, this is really particularly pertinent, right? So kids just kind of follow fads and trends, and you're trying to get them to be individuals and to understand what's going on. This is consistent with some of these ideas. This one's easy to understand, but really, really powerful. We like to say yes to people whom we like. Which means that we want to be likable in some sense. And what makes us likable? Well, if there's a lot of research to show that people who are physically attractive are more likable. People who are similar to us are more likable. So if somebody comes from the same town, same city, same country as you, more likable. If somebody has the same name as you, research has shown that even if you just tell them the same name, all of us, you don't know anything else, you're more likely to trust them, okay? For, I don't know why, but there you go. We like that. We like our names, so we like other people who have the same names as us. People who compliment us, people who are associated with positive things. I'll give you some funny examples. Who are these guys? Arnold, I'll be back. Who's the other guy?
Someone.
Someone?
Arnold.
Some Arnold. No, Cruz Bustamante. Okay, now you might remember that the Terminator became the governor of California, right? This happened during these recall elections, and there were a lot of people who ran for these recall elections, but the other big contender was this guy, Cruz Bustamante. Now, Cruz Bustamante, as it turns out, was extremely qualified for the position. He was the lieutenant governor. He'd been a public servant for many, many years. In fact, up until that time, he was like the highest ranking Latino in public office, okay? But he didn't win the elections. The famous Hollywood star won the elections, right? I mean, and this goes towards this idea of liking, especially since the vote was happening in California. I mean, this is a Hollywood world. People know him. People, like him. He represents all these cool things. He's married into the Kennedy family, or was at the time. Okay? And then things happened. Another example. Some of you guys might be aware of this. In the presidential elections in the U.S., the taller of the two candidates tends to win the electoral vote. It's a little bit messier with the other vote, but we like tall apparently, or tall symbolizes, I don't know, power or authority or something, and we tend to vote in the person who is tall, which is really bizarre, right? I mean, it's like, what does somebody's height, and I feel bad for myself, have anything to do with somebody's ability to be president? Not a whole lot, and yet the taller candidate tends to win the US presidential election. Now, some of you guys then are thinking of world leaders who may not be as tall. Sarkozy comes to mind, or when he was in power. And I don't know how much you know about Sarkozy, but first of all, he was quite short. But he tried really, really hard to make himself tall, okay? So there are pictures, and if you Google it, you'll see it. There are images of him standing on boxes in front of podiums, right? So if there's like a lectern and a mic and everything, he's standing on a box. Yeah. There are press conferences of him in like some sort of like company, like opening a new factory or something like that. And the story goes, they called around the entire organization looking for the shortest members of the organization to be in the photo shoot with him so that he wouldn't appear quite so short, right? So there is the sense that I want to seem tall, and being tall conveys good things that people like, bizarrely enough.
Was it Napoleon who had the heeled shoes for men?
I don't know whether he had heel shoes, but yes, I mean, he, again, notoriously short, right? I was just about to say, Kim Jong-il, there are pictures of him with these like lifts in his shoes, but it's to try and appear tall. Thoughts, questions, examples?
Is that considering like for like, i.e. when you're looking at men as opposed to man versus woman?
So, very good question, right? So at least with regards to these data, I mean, except for the last elections, it's always with men between men. So we don't know. And then the comment and the caveat that I often give, especially with these data, is who knows nowadays, because it's becoming more complex with gender coming into play, with race coming into play. That said, a big picture, there's generally a big main effect where, and this is very unfortunate and a whole different story, men are generally perceived as more competent. So it is going to be like for like, but there's also just a sense that men are more competent than women, which I beg to differ on, but separate story. Going to share with you two other principles. The second and last one is authority. We tend to say yes to people who are in positions of authority or seem like they're in positions of authority. Okay, so studies have been done, and it's really scary, where somebody dresses up like a doctor. So they put on a lab coat, they put on scrubs, they have a stethoscope, and then they'll go into a hospital, they'll find a nurse and start giving random instructions to the nurse on how to take care of patients. And the nurses very often say yes and follow through with the instructions. Obviously, they stop the nurse before bad things happen. But the idea is this person seems like an authoritative figure, and therefore people say yes to what they're saying or what they're asking for. Same things happens with regards to a lot of these, when people start investigating what's happened with airplane accidents, very often it has to do with the dynamics between the co-pilot and the pilot, right? So you guys may remember some years, maybe 5 years ago, there was a plane that, I think it was a Korean Airlines plane, that landed in San Francisco, and thankfully people were generally not hurt. There were not that many fatalities, and the plane managed to land fairly safely. And what happened is that they found out that the sun was in the pilot's eyes, but the co-pilot didn't want to put down any sort of shades or wear sunglasses because he thought that might be disrespectful to the pilot. And as a result of that, these sorts of like crazy things happen. Now, I put out these examples, and especially for you guys, I think it's useful to think about it from two ways. One is, how can I get people to do the things that I want them to do? Okay? But simultaneously, I think it's important to realize, especially with people who have a lot of seniority and manage other individuals, your own seniority, your own authority could be suppressing your employees' abilities to think creatively, to voice their opinions, because they're just kind of concerned, hang on, I better not speak up against my superior, against my boss, right? So we want to think about it from the two ways. Example that I have to mention when it comes to authority. Anybody heard of the Milgram experiments? Okay, this is a good one. Oh, I actually do have a little bit of a picture for you. Okay, so what happened? In the 1950s and 1960s, a guy by the name of Stanley Milgram wanted to try and understand why the atrocities of World War II happened. And one school of thought was, look, there are just some people who are bad, and they're bad, and that's what it is. Okay, they're bad apples, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's another school of thought that said, hang on a second, there was something about the situation that made really good people do some really bad things. And Stanley Milgram was of that opinion. So what did he do? He ran a study in New Haven, Yale, and where he brought in a bunch of people off of the street to be teachers, okay? And they were supposed to teach a student, who is this guy, who is actually working in collaboration with the experimenter. And this participant was told, look, you're the teacher, that person's a student, okay? And every time the student gets the answer wrong, you need to give them an electric shock, okay? And the student, as you can see, was hooked up to a bunch of wires. And then the teacher had control of a big box that had a bunch, flip chart one. That had a bunch of levers on it from 15 volts going all the way to 450 volts. Okay? Now, they asked a few psychiatrists beforehand, so what percentage of the people do you think would go all the way? And the psychiatrist said, no, very few, very few. Okay, people are good. It's only the nutty people, the psychotics, the sociopaths, who are going to do that. So what's the percentage of psychopaths and sociopaths? 1 to 2% of the population. Those are the only people who are going to go all the way to 450 volts. What percentage of the people do you think went all the way to 450 volts?
70 to 80%.
Very close, 2/3. 2/3 of the people went all the way to 450 volts. When the student, who was not very good at learning, got the questions wrong again and again, this person just kept on pressing these levers from 15 volts up, 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 up. They didn't stop when the student was screaming in pain, faking it. They didn't stop when the student shouted that he had a heart condition. They didn't stop when the student fainted dead away. Right? They just kept on going. Why did they do that? Because this guy, who was the experimenter, was standing there in his white lab coat with a clipboard there. And he never held a gun to the guy's head and said, you have to go. Nothing like that. But just prompts along the lines of, the experiment requires you to continue. Please continue. Right? So there were verbal prompts, but it was never anything physical that said, you have to do this. Now, these participants, they were stressed out beyond their minds. They were sweating profusely. They were shaking. They were traumatized from doing it, but they still did it. This is the power of authority. I will give you one thing to think about, though, keeping in mind the idea of commitment and consistency. Imagine if the study had started off here. My guess is that you would have a very different result. You probably wouldn't have had 2/3 of the people giving him a 450 volt shock, which, by the way, was also marked with XXX. Yeah. So, again, combining different types of principles can be very, very powerful. I have just a few minutes left with you, so I want to give you this last idea to think about, and hopefully that's enticing ideas, which is that when something is limited, we want it more. And that limited can be limited in time, limited in number. It's particularly valuable if it's just limited. And if you think about it now, almost all the sort of like places online where you can buy tickets do that, right? And even Amazon does that. When it's just a few more, they'll tell you 3 more, like buy now, right? Or for airline tickets, 4 more seats at this price. It's trying to tap into this principle of scarcity, getting you to get the sense of, I need to get in on this action now before that opportunity goes away. Auction fever, which I study a lot, is the perfect sort of combination of this. There's scarcity because in auctions it's typically one unique item. There's time pressure because you have to bid very quickly or the item goes away. And then there's competition with other people, right? So this competition increases the sense of the scarcity of the item. So all of that makes it really seem as though this item is really, really scarce. In general, we really need to beware this adrenaline rush, especially in a sort of like auction type setting. Take a break, think carefully, confer with your colleagues, but fundamentally understand your motivations for buying something or doing something. Is it just because it's very, very rare and very scarce, or is it because you really want it? Now, I bring this up, example, I'll give you just a second. And to something, I hadn't realized how perfect the timing for this is, but the Black Friday sales, which are on right now in the UK, and then they'll start in the US probably tomorrow. It's all about this idea here, yeah? Please.
Yeah, what happens in an auction if you get somebody to bid on your behalf? So they're actually not the buyer themselves.
Yeah.
And you give them obviously target price restrictions around what they're doing. Do they also get caught up in this adrenaline rush or not?
They might. They might, because at the end of the day, if they're watching all of, I mean, first of all, in theory, you're asking a professional to do it. So one might hope that they're therefore a little bit...
It's their house you to do it for me, to go to Sotheby's.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Have you done any work on it at all? That's really what...
That I have not. No, I have not, to see how an agent would do in this situation. But your example is interesting because when I said professional, then I'm saying, okay, they know something about auctions, they know how to do all of this, and in theory, they should be better off. Then you ask me specifically, then I'm going to be obnoxious and say, well, I know about scarcity. I know how to like guard against. So in theory, if you train somebody, then you're better off. So, but you can train yourself, you can train an agent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the dissociation between actually wanting an object yourself,
yes,
but then just the whole environment, how that actually affects someone who's caught up in it, even
Understood.
though they're not buying that object for themselves.
So that's a very good and important distinction, right? You're basically pointing out the fact that there are different psychological motivations for you as the buyer versus an agent as a buyer. And for both parties, there are things that will motivate them to keep going, but different types of things that will keep them going. So for each of the parties, you need to be careful of what the bottom line is, but you need to put in place different safeguards to ensure that they're not taken over by auction fever. Yeah.
I think on that example, like if you ask someone to go to the auction for you, if you tell them up front that you want that item, they will feel kind of compelled and they will feel this implicit liability towards you that if they miss out on that item and someone takes
it's a problem.
It's an issue because you employ them to get that for you. So I suppose if you don't tell them what the outcome you want is, then probably you can eliminate a bit of that.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to something that we've said before, right? Have very clear bottom lines, right? So that will prevent you from getting a bad deal, but it may not help you to get a good deal. Yeah. I saw a hand up. Yes, please.
I just wanted to share something.
Please.
So I used to be CEO of the Metro newspaper, which probably most people know of it, and I was involved in the launch period of that. And the scarcity was exactly what we did in the early days. And what I've realised actually is it bled a few of the things we've talked about.
Okay.
Because what we deliberately did was undersupply the London market, the numbers of copies, to create a scarcity. And if you see at the bottom of the bins now, you'll still see it says you've got to be quick because suddenly you're going to put lots of free newspapers into London. There was no value, potentially no value being attached to it, so we had to create value, which was by limiting supply.
Yeah.
And then it was about creating a habit because obviously this consistency of need to get there and get quick. And also reciprocity, because when people felt as if they'd been given this for free, they felt as if they had to move it for
That's a lovely example. Thank you. Yeah.
Just as I say, the scarcity was the thing that you think about. But actually
It taps into all of these principles, which is why it becomes very powerful when you're using all of these different principles simultaneously. I'm at time, but can I please give you my favorite example? Diamonds. So pretty. Yeah, timeless classics. Beauty, fire, love, brilliance. Women tend to like them. What do we know about diamonds? Scarce? Are they really scarce? Tell me more.
So De Beers control the supply. And for those who are married or about to get married, engagement rings were not a thing until the 1920s, 30s, when I think it was De Beers.
Yeah, it was
De Beers launched their advertising campaign, "You're going to get married by an engagement ring." When 1 month's salary lasted this long, revenue ticked up very nicely. They thought, we're on something here. We launched the next advertising campaign when 3 months salary lasted a lifetime.
It's brilliant, though. Okay, I mean, so. Yes.
I didn't deny it.
Yes.
It is genius.
It is genius. So that's exactly it. Okay. So I mean, look, diamonds. There are tons of diamonds in this world. There are just loads and loads of diamond in the world. But De Beers holds control of the supply of diamonds. It limits the supply. It makes it to be a perceived value combined with some clever marketing. And biggity bam boom, we really, really want them. Now, I have to say this because it's important. We're looking at the women in the room going, oh, yeah, we want these diamonds. But you guys have the things that you want too, okay? I don't know whether it's the iPhone or the watch or the stereo or the gadget or the limited edition print or whatever it is, but you guys, women and men, have things that they covet because of scarcity, yeah? Let me just end with this final idea here. When we think about influence and persuasion, I've talked a lot about these ideas. There are other things that fall into how it is that we can influence and persuade people. The bottom line, if you don't remember anything else, remember this. You guys have been trained to strategically think about the content of your message. Yes, the content of your message is important. But when you're trying to influence and persuade somebody, think also about how you're creating that relationship, how you're framing the information that you're conveying, because that has a huge impact on how it is that you influence and persuade people. I'll stop. I'm happy to take questions or thoughts, but I know that I'm also over time.
Right, don't worry. Any questions or thoughts for Gillian?
final questions? Yeah, so just going back to I think all of that is great and makes a lot of sense. Going back to commitment and consistency. Sunk cost fallacy, absolutely true. The thing I had a question about was with the consistency, you used that example of putting a sticker on the window and then getting the big. I think that works from a company person perspective. If you're the one who's doing negotiating and you're going to someone to say, here, can you do this for me? And it's a small thing, and then later you go back and say, no, can you do this big thing? Yeah, they might get caught up in the consistency, but isn't there a danger that they'll think, actually, I've already done you a favour? I'm not going to go back to that.
It could be, right? But the way that I'd actually think about doing it is if you're trying to get in with a company, it's, hey, can I have a meeting with you to have a chat about something? Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Right? And then from that coffee, it's the biggest sale after that. So it doesn't, yes, they've given you their time, but you've bought them coffee. Right.
So you're using reciprocity?
Yes. Yes. Please.
Just on the takeaway, how you say something is as important, if not more so. Yeah. Do you have an example of that?
I guess it's, what I'm just trying to do is to summarize this idea that the ideas of influence and persuasion are all of this stuff is not necessarily around what you're saying. So think about politicians, okay, and these like tight things that we're talking about, or the attractiveness things about. It's not their actual political positions that they're conveying. Yeah, okay, there's something there, but people are being persuaded by other things like their attractiveness, their height. So that's what I'm trying to convey to you, that the message is important, and the message is particularly important if people are motivated to listen to you and have the cognitive resources to listen to what you have to say. But especially if they don't have cognitive and motivation resources there, you want to focus on how you're getting to them. Buying them a coffee, asking for a little bit of time, and then asking for more time, doing them a favor, those kinds of things.
Probably actually the difference between Obama, who was a brilliant orator, and you can question about some of the actions afterwards, where with Trump, who comes across as being somewhat uncouth, so people don't necessarily listen to him, but maybe should do. So you've got these trade-offs.
Yeah, exactly, right. So there's a message component, but there's also how you're delivering it. Absolutely. Let me stop. Thank you guys very much for your time, and I hope you have an interesting rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
As mentioned, my name is Deepak Malhotra. I'm at the Harvard Business School. I've been on the faculty there for about 15 years. I got there in 2002, and my area of work is negotiations. Negotiation, deal-making, disputes, conflict, diplomacy, anything in that area is things that I find interesting. Now, being at a business school, most of my work is in the world of business, and most of the stuff I do outside of Harvard Business School is working with companies, often early-stage companies or entrepreneurs, thinking about how to help them, consult with them, advise them on difficult deals, strategic partnerships, issues they face in scaling or other kinds of strategic problems. But while I work a lot with businesses, I also do some work in some other areas. I work with some governments thinking about how to help resolve armed conflicts, ethno-political conflicts. They're dealing with insurgencies or a peace process. I do some work with hospitals and doctors so they can think more carefully about how they might have effective conversations with their patients so that their patients can make better health decisions. And the reason I mention that, the work outside of the business area, in the world of conflict, in the world of medicine, etc. The reason I mention that is because it's gone a long way in shaping my own view about what negotiation is and what negotiation is not. And I like to lay out my perspective at the very beginning before I dive into specifics. Having negotiated and worked on negotiations and consulted with and studied negotiations in different industries, also in different domains like conflict and healthcare, one of the things I've come to appreciate is that at the end of the day, negotiation is not about dollars and cents. And it's not about deal terms. And it's not about emotions. And it's not about lives lost or lives saved. It's not about ceasefires. At the end of the day, negotiation, no matter where you're negotiating, what the substance of the negotiation is, how many people you're dealing with, negotiation is always fundamentally about human interaction. And the question we are always trying to answer, the problem we're always trying to solve as negotiators, is how do we engage with other people in such a way as to achieve better understandings and better agreements? That's it. Doesn't matter what we're negotiating, through which medium we're negotiating, what the stakes are, how complex it is. What we're always doing as negotiators is trying to figure out how do we engage with other people in such a way as to achieve better understandings and better agreements. And what I'm going to try to do over the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes is talk about some of the things that you might do, perhaps differently than you've been doing, to make it more likely that you achieve success in that endeavor as you're dealing with other human beings. Now, I spend all of my time thinking about negotiations, and I'm pretty sure you don't spend all of your days thinking about negotiations, but most of you would probably admit that many of the interactions you have in your work, but also outside of the professional sphere, have a negotiation element to them. Anytime you're dealing with someone who has a different perspective than you do, anytime you're dealing with someone who has different interests than you do, a negotiation lens can be useful. And so what we're going to be talking about now is some of the ways in which you can make sure that when you're negotiating, when you find yourself in a situation where you're doing a deal or you're in a dispute or some kind of conflict, you might be able to navigate it a little bit better. And the way we're going to do it is what we call this session is negotiation tweaks. And the inspiration for that term comes from golf. I don't golf very much, but whenever I tell someone I like golfing and I would like to be better at golf, often what they will tell me is it's a really good idea to go to a coach, to a professional, to get at least one lesson. And I'll say, well, what's one lesson going to do? And they're going to say, well, it's not going to make you a great golfer. But immediately they're going to look at how you golf, and they're going to be able to give you a few tweaks. They'll see the way you grip the golf club. They'll look at your swing. They'll look at whether you're bending your arm or not. They'll look at how your feet are positioned. And they'll be able to pick up a couple of things that you can do that are quick fixes, easy tweaks that you can make that will have downstream consequences to make you more effective at golf. I haven't done that, but I like the idea. And so I'm going to do the same thing in this world of negotiation. In the 40 minutes I have, and now of course less than 40 minutes, I'm going to try to go through 22 things you might consider doing in your negotiations. Some of these things maybe you're already doing, some of these things might be the opposite of what you've been doing, some of these things might be something you never thought about before. And my hope is that everybody who's listening to this, either in the audience live here or online, will be able to find at least 1 or 2 or 3 things that you look at and you say, oh, that's interesting, I never quite thought of doing it that way. Or that's something I should really share with my team, because as an organization we don't do that systematically enough. And the way we're going to go about it is the flow of the conversation is going to be, by and large, from what happens in the early stages of negotiation before you get into the room to what happens as you go through it and then when you leave the room. That's kind of how we're going to be thinking about this. And since I'm going to try to get through 22 of these things, some of these we're going to cover quickly. Others we're going to cover even more quickly. All right, so that's how this is going to go. So the first thing I want to point out, having advised on lots of deals, $1 million deals, $1 billion deals, multi-billion dollar deals, and things where money is not at stake, one of the most important things I can tell you right off the bat is you want to have a strategy meeting. You do not want to walk in there relying only on your intuition, relying only on gut instinct. In my experience, intuition is very nice, gut instinct is very, very nice, but it is not strategy. Nor should it be a substitute for careful analysis when the stakes are high or the situation is complex. Invite more people into that strategy meeting than you think you need. I have never regretted bringing in a couple of other folks. The 4th or 5th or 6th person will not add as much as a 2nd or 3rd person did, but they will shape the conversation in a way that will be useful, and they will add something that will be useful. They're going to see it from a perspective that's different from the ones you've been seeing it. The biz dev person brings something different than the general counsel, brings somebody different from the salesperson, brings something different from the operations person, and somebody who's on the front lines. You want to have a strategy meeting. Too many people walk into a negotiation thinking negotiation is about knowing what you want and then having 4 or 5 or 6 arguments for why they should give it to you. And they go into the room and they say, here's what I want and here's why it should happen this way, and then they hope for the best. That's not negotiation. As we're going to find out as we go forward, there's a lot more you need to be doing, and you need to be coordinated as a team. One other thing about being in a meeting like this, one of the mistakes I've seen people make, especially leaders of organizations or senior managers or team leaders, is that they create a culture, they create an environment in their meetings and in their organizations that rewards people for coming up with the right answer. Now that seems like a reasonable thing to do. You want the right answer, so you should reward people for coming up with the right answer or the right strategy. But I actually think that's the wrong way to go about it. You don't want people in the room to come up with or to feel like they're going to be rewarded for coming up with the right answer. You want to reward people for coming up with good arguments. Because this is not a math problem, usually. It's not like there is one right answer that the smartest person in the room is going to be able to figure out. If it's an interesting enough negotiation, if the stakes are high, if it's a complex negotiation, the solution is not going to be obvious to one person. It's going to be built on the good arguments that different people make. And it's not that you walk in and say, okay, whoever comes up with the right strategy is going to get a $1,000 bonus. But we do it implicitly. See, when the leader talks in a meeting, and you're sitting in a boardroom, you're sitting in any kind of meeting, whether he or she is the CEO or the founder or a team leader, when the leader talks, they look at everybody as they're talking. But when anybody else in the room talks, they're almost always looking right at the leader. And they're looking to see, is this person nodding along? Are they liking what I'm saying? And they try to get to the right answer as quickly as they can. That's not the kind of environment you want. You want to reward people for coming up with good arguments. Next, you have to know what's going to happen to you if there's no deal. This should be sort of obvious. You will make crucial mistakes if you haven't thought through carefully as a team, what is our walkaway point? How bad is it really if we don't get this deal? Or how good is it really if we don't get this deal? You need to know this, but there's a caveat. You don't want to become obsessed with what happens to you if there's no deal. One of the things that we've learned through research, through experience, is that it turns out negotiators who walk into a room obsessed with what's going to happen to me if there's no deal, those folks get systematically worse outcomes than people who walk into a room knowing what happens to them if there's no deal, but making the negotiation about what happens to the other side if there's no deal. When you frame the negotiation around what happens to them if there's no deal, now you're essentially making it about the value you bring to the table for the other side. And when you make the negotiation about the value you bring to the table, that's when you have the possibility, the opportunity to monetize the value you create in the system for the other side, for their organization, etc. So know what happens to you if there's no deal. Otherwise, you're going to make crucial mistakes. But as much as you need to know that, you need to focus on what happens to them if there's no deal. Why are they here today? What keeps this person up at night? What do I do for them that nobody else can do for them? If you frame it around that, you have a greater opportunity for creating and capturing value in that deal. Next, too many folks get obsessed with the substance of the deal for good reasons. Substance is all of the things that are going to be in the deal. The terms, the offers and counteroffers are about the substance of the deal. The language in the contract is the substance of the deal. What you don't want to lose sight of is process. Process is what gets us from where we are today to the finish line. And the finish line might be a signed deal. It might be the implementation of a deal, depending on the kind of negotiation you're doing. One of the things I advise all of my clients and all of my students to do is to get into the habit of negotiating process before substance. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine a scenario where you've been negotiating for, say, 6 months or 9 months or 10 months. And imagine that this is the kind of deal where that's a good amount of time. And after these 6 or 9 or 10 months, you finally get to the point where you think the finish line is in sight. You think this deal might be able to be done. Now, you've got a couple of concessions saved up in your back pocket for exactly a moment like today. And you throw those out there hoping it will seal the deal. And the other side looks at you and says, thank you, this is great, we really appreciate this, this is very helpful. Now let me just go talk to my boss and see what she thinks about it. And you're sitting there going, wait, what? You have a boss? I thought this was it. I thought we were done. I've got nothing left to give. That's an example of what can go wrong when you don't negotiate process before you jump into negotiating substance. Negotiating process before you dive into substance is about asking things like, how long does it take an organization like yours to do a deal like this? Who are all the people that need to be signed on before this deal goes through? What are some factors that might speed things up, and what are some factors that might slow things down? Process before substance is also about having conversations like, what are we going to be discussing in the meeting tomorrow? Who's going to be in the room? What about these other issues that we care a lot about? When will we be able to touch on those? All of these things, none of these things have to do with the substance of the deal. It's all about how we're going to get from where we are today to where we want to go. And if you think about the negotiations that fail, many of them fail because people did not give enough attention, did not respect enough process. They didn't have a process strategy, they didn't coordinate on process, they didn't think through process. One other thing I'm going to talk about on process. It's going to be the next lesson. This is point number 5. It actually comes from the world of mediation. Any of you ever been through a mediation, like a conflict, a dispute mediation? Some of you clearly have. If you ever go through a really ugly conflict, it could be a business conflict, it could be a family conflict, any kind of conflict, and it's really ugly, and you go to a mediator whose job is to help you solve this problem. One of the things an effective mediator might do on day one, when he or she brings the people into the room, the mediator might say something like this: you two think you hate each other today? We're going to be at this for a week. And about 3 days into this process, you're going to hate each other more than you've ever hated each other. And when that happens, I just want you to remember something. That's normal. That's normal. Now think about why a mediator might say that. What happens if the mediator doesn't say that? And 3 days into the week, you hate each other more than you've ever hated each other. The emotions have gotten even stronger. There's more anger and anxiety than ever before. What are you going to think? You're going to think this is not working. All right, we're moving in the wrong direction. And you're going to quit the process entirely. And what the mediator is doing, it's called normalizing the process. The mediator is normalizing the process for you. They're letting you know that things don't go from bad to good, getting better every day when you try to take on these difficult challenges. The process from bad to good goes a little bit like this. And that's how you get there. So when you're down there, you don't overweight it too much. You don't read too much into it. This idea of normalizing the process is something we should be doing in negotiations of all kinds, not just ugly conflicts. I was talking to a guy from, he had a business in South Asia, and his business was, he had a lot of manufacturing facilities. One of the things he told me, we were talking about something else, he brought this issue up. He says, one of the things I've learned is I will not do business with anybody from the West, he said. And by the West, he meant the US, Europe, etc. He said, I will not do business with anybody from the West unless they are willing to fly into my city, get out of the airport, get into a car that we'll send for them, and drive from the airport to our manufacturing facilities, which are about 18 kilometers away and take about 3 hours to get to. Until they've done that once, they don't know how it works here. And the first time something goes wrong, they assume it's because we're stealing from them or because we don't know what we're doing. You need to normalize the process for them even when you're selling to them, but too often we don't do that. We're so busy trying to seal the deal, sign the deal, get them to say yes, that we make it sound like nothing will go wrong. There will be no disruptions. There will be no delays. We'll always be seeming as enthusiastic as we are today. And when any of those things change or go wrong, they end up overweighting it. But when you've let them know along the way, here's what's normal, here's how we get from here to there, we'll get there, but here's the path to it, it's less likely that delays, disruptions, and other sorts of bumps in the road end up being relationship killers down the line. Next, I know a lot of people who talk too much in negotiations. I know almost no one who asks too many questions. If you could have one mindset going into every future negotiation, people can have very different mindsets. Some people go in thinking this is war. Some people are thinking going this is relational. Some people are thinking long term. Some people have a short term attitude. Some people are thinking strategically, some people are thinking tactically. You can have any mindset you want, really. But if you had to pick one, if you could take only one mindset and click it on before you walk into every future negotiation, I would strongly suggest walking into every future negotiation with a learning mindset. You are there above all to learn as much as you can about all of the parties that are relevant to this negotiation, whether they're inside the room or not. What are their interests? What do they care about more? What do they care about less? What keeps them up at night? Why are they doing this deal today rather than 6 months from now or a year ago? What are their constraints? What are the things they can and cannot do? How are they seeing the situations? Think about the questions you ask. Write down all the things you wish you could know. They're not going to answer every question, but they're more likely to answer them if you ask than if you don't ask. And when you're done coming up with every question you can think of, I suggest you add another 10 more to the list. All right? And your team will help you. All right? A lot of people talk a lot, not enough people ask enough questions. Now, it's not just about asking more questions. You also have to ask the right questions. Now, every negotiation is different. And so the right question will vary depending on the context, the situation, where in the process you are. But one little hint. In general, why is more important than what? People talk about what all the time, what they want. You might say what you want. We want the deal done in 6 months. We want more money up front. We want exclusivity. We don't want exclusivity. That's the what. These are the demands people make, the positions they hold. Your job as a negotiator is to try and get underneath that and figure out why they want these things. What are the things that are driving them? What's the underlying motivation? And when you shift the conversation from what to why, you often find more ways of resolving the dispute, resolving the conflict, resolving the deadlock. Often, the two sides have seemingly incompatible positions. I want exclusivity, they don't want to give me exclusivity. Those seem incompatible. And if they're deal breakers for both sides, you're done. But sometimes what you find is when you start digging a little bit underneath the surface, why? What's their real fear? What are they concerned about? Is it that they never want to give it, or they don't want to give it for more than a year? Is it the specific competitor they're worried about? What's the story here? When you go from what to why, often you find that seemingly incompatible positions actually are hiding underlying interests that are actually reconcilable. Get into the habit of asking more questions, get into the habit of asking why, and figuring out what's actually driving their demands. Next, they're going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be asking you questions, and sometimes these are not the questions you want to hear. How many of you know who Mike Tyson is? Okay. Boxer, heavyweight champion, known for a few other things. There's a story about Mike Tyson, and it may be apocryphal, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. When Mike Tyson had been heavyweight champion for some time, he was being interviewed, and somebody asked him, Mike, how do you sustain this level of success? The question is not how you got here, but how do you continue to stay here? And more specifically, every boxer that walks into the ring with you now, every one of them has studied you. They've seen all the footage. They've walked into the ring with a plan designed specifically to beat Mike Tyson. How then do you continue to win? And Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Now, whether he actually said this or not, this is true. And the same is true when you're out pitching your wares, your product, your service, your solution, your idea, your approach. You need to think about all of the things that can go wrong and have answers for them or have a way of dealing with. In general, a little tip in sales. If there's a weakness in your argument, it's almost always better if it comes out of your mouth before it comes out of their mouth. If it comes out of their mouth first, it becomes a bigger thing. The fastest way to lose credibility as a salesperson is to walk in and make it sound like you think your product, your solution is right for everybody on the planet. Even if you believe that's true, the moment you sound like that, you lose credibility in their eyes because they don't believe it. They assume your competitors exist for some reason. They assume there are other interests and other ideas out there for some reason. And so what you need to be thinking about is if there's a weakness in the argument, if there's a counterpoint, if the competitors are actually telling them to ask these tough questions, how am I going to manage those? So have a learning mindset, but respect the fact that they see the world differently. Next. There is this notion that you should let the other side make the first offer. Now, I could have talked about this point for about 20, 30 minutes and get into all the evidence. All I want to suggest for right now is that I disagree wholeheartedly with this notion that you want the other side to make the opening offer. I am not saying that there are not occasions where that might be the right tactic. But I am a huge fan of being the party that presents the first offer, presents the first MOU, the first term sheet, the first LOI, whatever it may be, because it helps you control the frame of it. You set the reference point. You shape expectations. Think carefully about who's going to make the opening offer. There is tremendous power in the party that sets the opening offer, that creates the opening expectation. All right. So if you've heard this, and you may have heard it on TV, on some shows where they talk a lot about negotiations, I strongly suggest think about this a little bit more deeply. Next. One of the other things I'm a huge fan of telling my students, my clients, is never let your offer speak for itself. Whether you're making the opening offer or a counter offer, when you make an offer, don't let the number speak for itself. $50,000, $5 million, $100 million. Tell the story that goes with it. We are asking for X because ... We're asking for X. Here's our model. Here's our analysis. Here are our assumptions. The richer the narrative, the richer the story, again, the more likely your number sticks. More likely that the other side has to come up with a compelling reason before they choose to just ignore it. It is much easier to ignore an offer that does not come with a story, that does not come with a justification, that does not come with a narrative, than it is to ignore one that has all of those features to it. Next, label your concessions. The idea of telling the story that goes with it, if you sort of zoom out for a moment, what we're really trying to say here is don't leave it up to chance how they will interpret what you're saying. As a negotiator, you want to manage the attributions people make of what you're doing. So when you make a concession, for example, the exact same concession in a negotiation can seem like a nice gesture. It can seem like a wise approach to negotiation, but a concession can also seem like what? It could be a gift. What else? Weakness. You could look desperate. You could look naive. Well, what do you want them to think when you make a concession? Well, ideally, you want them to, ideally, you want them to think you are wise and nice, smart and nice, not naive or desperate. But the same concession can be interpreted many different ways. So one of the things you always want to be doing, whether it's making a concession, whether it's calling them back, whether it's choosing not to call back, is think about the attributions they're going to make and get into the habit of trying to manage the attributions. And how you do it depends on the situation. You're not going to say, here's a concession, and just so you know, that is because I'm wise and I'm smart and I'm being nice, not those things. But you need to think about, am I going to come across as desperate if I make it now or in this way without ... And how do I make sure that the right attribution gets established? All right. One of the mistakes people often make in negotiation is they get into what I would call mindless haggling. Now, there's going to be some haggling in a negotiation. They're going to start one place, you're going to start some other place. But the mistake we often make is to take a rich, complex negotiation and turn it into a series of haggles. We need to talk about price, we're going to haggle on price. And tomorrow we're going to talk about financing terms, we're going to haggle over financing terms. Then we're going to talk about exclusivity, then we're going to haggle over exclusivity. A better approach to negotiating, typically, is instead of going one issue at a time, is to negotiate multiple interests simultaneously. One of the pieces of advice we often give is try to break the habit of going one issue at a time and trying to get resolution on that issue and then moving on to the next thing. You're much more likely to find wise trades, where they're more flexible, where there's less flexibility, what you should be given, what you do not have to give if you are negotiating multiple issues simultaneously, rather than doing a series of haggle one issue at a time. Have comprehensive offers and counteroffers that you give. If somebody says to me, could you do like 60% up front instead of 40% up front? My answer is not yes or no. My answer is I have no idea what you're talking about. In what context? What are the other terms of this deal? And it's much more effective for both sides if you get into the habit of making package offers and counteroffers. But when it comes to making an offer, so next time you're in a negotiation, consider doing something a little bit differently than you might have done in the past. In your next negotiation, there will come a time when you have to make an offer. Either it's the opening offer or it's a counteroffer. Next time you're supposed to make an offer, don't make an offer. Instead, make 2 or 3 offers at the same time. This is a notion of what's called making multiple offers simultaneously. Instead of saying, my offer is this price with this royalty rate with these terms, you give them 2 or 3 full packages. We can do it option A, we can do option B, or we can do option C. The reason to do that is because often you don't know where they have more or less flexibility. When you give them 2 or 3 different ways of doing it, you not only signal flexibility, which they appreciate, you can say legitimately to them, listen, we know what works for us, but we also want to make sure it works for you. So if you can do it with a very, very high royalty rate, here's what that would take. But if you don't have much flexibility on that, but you have flexibility on these other terms, we could do it this way or this way as well. My record, I believe, for the most number of offers I made at one time to the other side, it was a deal we were doing in Australia, was 27. Now it sounds crazier than it was. There was 3 broad categories of offers. We can do it this way, this way, or this way, with some permutations that were sort of described in each one. And the reason we had to do it was because they weren't willing to sit down with any of the people that were bidding for this project. And so we wanted to make sure that we're not guessing incorrectly what they care about more and what they care about less, where they do and don't have flexibility. So we're going to tell them all the different ways we can do it. Generally speaking, I'm a huge fan of saying to the other side in a negotiation, I know where I need to get. I'm flexible on how we get there. I will often say exactly those words. I know where we need to get. I am flexible on how we get there. So as long as you can meet these needs, we're going to be flexible on style, structure, and anything else that you need. Or to put it a different way, the more currencies you allow someone to pay you in, the more likely you get paid. All right, so it's one thing to want this much, but if you're also going to tell them, and the only way we're going to accept it is if you do it this way, you're creating more constraints. If you show more flexibility in the deal structure, all of a sudden there's more degrees of freedom for them to be able to give you what you need to be able to say yes happily. Initial reactions matter. We know this in general. Let me give you one specific example of it, having been in the room and having been in a lot of negotiations where this often goes wrong. It's just a small tweak. Somebody makes you an offer on the phone or in a meeting, face-to-face, whatever. And it's a ridiculous offer. If it's a ridiculous offer, don't waste any time before you reject it or signal this to them. Sometimes you feel like, well, I don't have the authority to say yes or no, so I'm going to go back to my team and sort of discuss our response. It doesn't work so well if somebody says to you, so we're offering X. And you say, okay, well, let me write that down. I'll get back to you. And then you go back, and then you come back and you say, it's totally ridiculous. It doesn't seem totally ridiculous, because if it was totally ridiculous, you probably would have signaled it before. Too often, we're not ready to respond to some things that may come up. It's not so different from being prepared to answer the toughest questions they may raise. Think in advance about what kind of signals you want to send them under different situations. Otherwise, the signal might not be credible. Next. Understand and respect their constraints. There are things in negotiations that you deserve, that are rightfully yours, that you, quote, should get, which you will not get simply because their hands are truly tied. And the sooner and the more effectively you figure out where they have more and less flexibility, where the hands are truly tied and where they might be able to give, the more likely you can navigate the deal in the direction that's going to get you what you want while allowing them to say yes. You need to put yourself in their shoes. You need to respect the fact that just because you want it and you think it's rightfully yours, it may be that there actually is some issue there where they have some hard constraints. Think about why they might reject your legitimate demands. Now, as you start giving them this benefit of the doubt, again, step back a little bit, because there's a broader point I want to make. Very often people will come to me and they'll say something like, you know, I'm dealing with these folks and they're completely irrational. Or I'm dealing with these folks and they're very, very stubborn. Or I'm dealing with these folks, it's a very difficult negotiation because they're very untrustworthy. Never in my life has somebody come up to me and said, I'm in this really tough negotiation, I'm the irrational one. I'm the untrustworthy one, I'm the stubborn one. And I start to think that the nicest people on the planet must reach out to me for help, because it's never them. What I want to suggest to you is that it doesn't do you any favors to see them as irrational. I got to tell you, and I've been in many parts of the world with many different kinds of negotiations and conflicts and disputes. The people you're dealing with are not irrational. It is highly unlikely that you're dealing with someone who's actually irrational. By irrational, I mean someone who is knowingly doing something that they know will reach the opposite of outcome of what they want. That's probably not what's happening. That would be irrational. I know A is going to cause B, I don't want B, and I'm still going to knowingly do A. That's not how people behave. Usually what looks like rationality to us is one of two things. It could be ignorance, or it could be that they have interests that we don't fully appreciate. So when somebody is saying no to what you know is the best offer that you're ever going to get, and they're walking away when it's only going to be worse for them if they walk away than saying yes, that seems irrational, but maybe it's not irrationality, it's ignorance. Maybe they haven't fully understood the value to them. And if that's the problem, the solution might be, how do we educate them about the value we bring to the table? Or it could be that they have different interests. Maybe accepting this offer makes them look bad. Even if it's the best deal they're going to get, but saying yes maybe makes them look bad. And they don't want to look bad. That's not irrational. They just have other interests. Or it's the best deal they're going to find, but if they do it, it sets a bad precedent in future deals. There's something else going on. Before you jump to assuming somebody's irrational or crazy or evil or out to get you, step back and really try to understand, how do they see the situation? What's actually driving this behavior? How does this person go to bed at night not thinking of themselves as irrational or crazy or evil? And when you have this level of empathy, you're not doing it to do them a favor. When you see the world this way, when you have this level of empathy, you're actually doing yourself a favor. Because if somebody is irrational, the only solution is to lock them up, all right? Or walk away. If they're evil, they must be destroyed. But if there's something else going on, it gives you more levers to push and pull to solve the issue, all right? Now, when it comes to this notion of economics and the psychology of the deal, it may be the best deal that they're ever going to get, but they're still saying no because one of the things that I've found in business deals and other deals is that often people can't say yes without looking bad. And there's a phrase that was coined initially by a fellow by the name of Bill Urey, who's a colleague of ours at Harvard Law School for many years. He came up with this phrase, which I love. He talked about it in the context of conflict. We need to get into the habit of writing their victory speech for them. We need to write their victory speech for them. We can't be so self-focused on what we need that we lose sight of the fact that they have an audience. And so one of the things you want to be doing in a deal, especially if it's a difficult negotiation, is think about the person who's on the other side of the table and ask yourself, how will this person possibly say yes to what I'm proposing and still be able to go back and declare victory to whoever their audience is? Maybe it's their boss, maybe it's their partners, maybe it's their team, maybe it's their shareholders, maybe it's their investors, maybe it's their voters, whoever it may be. How are they going to pitch this? How are they going to look good at the end of this deal? All right? Because what you don't want is to be generous, to bring a lot of value to the table, to negotiate in good faith, and still not get the deal, even though it was the right deal for everyone, because you didn't understand their real problem. In negotiations, you can't walk away saying, well, that's their problem. Anything that looks like their problem somehow finds a way of becoming your problem, all right? Because you're in a negotiation. Next, let's take the same principle and apply it in a more tactical way. Any of you ever been in a negotiation where somebody made an ultimatum to you? Threw out an ultimatum, like, we'll never do this. You must do this. Yes? Yes. If you've lived, you've had an ultimatum thrown at you. My response, if somebody makes an ultimatum to me, to our side, if I'm in a negotiation, if I'm in a conflict, if I'm in a deal scenario, if it's a diplomatic situation, whatever, if the other side makes an ultimatum to us, I don't care if it's face-to-face, if it's an email, if it's a phone call, my response almost always is the same. If you're going to make an ultimatum to me, my response is going to be to simply ignore it. I'm not going to ask you to repeat what you said. I'm not going to ask you to explain what you said. I'm going to pretend it was never said and move on and address everything else you've touched on except the ultimatum. Now, why is that? A week from now, a month from now, a year from now, there may come a time when what you said you would never do, you realize you must do. Or what you said you would never do, you realize is actually in your interest to do. And when that day comes, the last thing I want you to remember is having said, I will never do this. Or the really last thing I want you to remember is me remembering you having said, you'll never do this. Because on that day, that will be the problem. It's the same principle. I'm thinking about how to write your victory speech for you on that day. I'm going to ignore your ultimatum so that I never force somebody to choose between doing what's smart and doing what makes them look good. To the extent possible, you want to align those two things. Now, you might ask legitimately, what if it's a real ultimatum and there you are ignoring it? Practically speaking, experientially, what I'll tell you is that's not a serious issue. And the reason is if it's a real ultimatum, they really cannot do this. Don't worry. They're going to keep repeating that ultimatum over and over again through every channel, through the entirety of the negotiation. And at some point you can decide, based on your understanding of the situation and where they've shown more and less flexibility and everything else you've learned in the process, that maybe this is a real red line for them. But it's also the case that often what comes across as an ultimatum isn't a real ultimatum. Sometimes people just feel like they've been pushed long enough, and they're trying to assert some control. Sometimes they're just trying to get some tactical advantage. I'll say I can never do it, and then they'll have to move. Sometimes, maybe cross-culturally especially, the language just gets used a little bit more strongly than it was intended or needed to be used. And for all those reasons, it's often better to just ignore it. Now, I will give you one variation on the theme. Sometimes, it is difficult to ignore what somebody said. If we're negotiating and the only thing you say to me is, I'm never going to do this, and that's all you said, and you're sitting right there, it's hard to ignore. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. If I must engage with what somebody said, and it's an ultimatum, what I will often do, this is the variation on the theme, I will reframe it as a non-ultimatum before I move on. So if you say to me, I can never do this, I might say something like, listen, I understand given where things are today, this would be very hard for you to do. I get that. And what I'm doing is creating at least two outs. First, given where we are today, in other words, tomorrow or a year from now, we may not be where we are today. And secondly, this would be very hard for you to do, and I get that, rather than this is, of course, never going to happen. All right? And never in my experience has somebody stopped me at that point and said, no, that's not what I said. I said never, ever, ever, ever. Usually they'll let it go and they understand, okay, point has been made, and now both sides have some outs. All right? Now, that's the getting ultimatums. Let me also just say a quick word, point number 19, about making ultimatums. Because people often ask, should you make ultimatums in negotiations? I have sort of two criteria when it comes to making ultimatums. The we will never do this, sort of getting aggressive or absolutist, no flexibility on something. I will only make an ultimatum if A, it's a real ultimatum, in that I will actually follow through on what I said. Because for me, safeguarding our credibility and legitimacy is paramount. I'm only going to make an ultimatum if I will actually follow through on it if they don't do what was asked for. Second, even if it's a real ultimatum, even if I'm ready to follow through on it, I will not use an ultimatum if I can find some other way of solving my problem. Because ultimatums can sometimes leave a bad taste in people's mouths. People don't like to be told what to do. They don't like it when they think you're being very aggressive or forcing them to do certain things. Some sort of psychological reactance comes in. So if I can find a better way of achieving what I'm trying to achieve, conveying what I'm trying to convey, getting the concession I need to get without getting aggressive tactically, I'm going to do it. But if both of these criteria are met, this is what I need to do, then I'm perfectly okay doing it. And often it's good that the other side knows what you can and cannot do. If this is truly a deal breaker for me, we're both better off if this is conveyed. Next point. One of the things that often happens is people walk out of negotiation and they didn't get a deal, which is okay. A lot of deals shouldn't happen. If there's a better partner they should be working with, if there's a better product for their problem, you shouldn't get the deal. No deal is not a problem. No deal is only tragic when you really were the right partner for them, when you actually did create value for each other, when there was nobody better for both of you than the two of you together. And when those deals end, and I know that's a little tragic because you've destroyed some value, the thing that I don't like is when somebody walks out of a room, and if I ask them, so what happened? They say, we didn't get the deal. And I say, okay, well, what went wrong, or how come? And sometimes the answer is, I still have no idea. I still have no clue. I still don't know what they really wanted. That's the thing I don't like. I can live with we didn't get the deal. But my view is, and it's not always possible to accomplish, but it often is, don't let negotiations end with a no. Negotiations should end either with a yes or with an explanation as to why not. If you're going to walk away and the deal is still a no, still push, still probe, still ask questions. Exactly what would have made it different. I've often said to the other side, I understand it's a no, I understand this deal is not going to happen, but paint me a picture. Imagine a world where you were actually saying yes, not no. Paint me a picture. What would that world need to have looked like? What would need to have been different about that? And people are often open to that conversation. And sometimes what I learn is I have even more confidence that this deal was never going to happen because what they would need is impossible for us to give at this point. Sometimes I say, wait a second, we can actually address that problem. And sometimes I say, okay, we can't get the deal today, but at least now I know what it's going to take in the future, either with them or with people like them, if we run into this kind of thing. All right? Next point. Small point, small tweak, small tactical thing, again, but something you see often happening. When you get done with the meeting, if it was face-to-face, phone call, whatever it was, I'm a huge fan of sending an email. Sending an email afterwards allows you to do a couple of things. First, it allows you to make sure you're still on the same page, that what you thought you agreed to actually has been agreed to. So you can sort of confirm where things are, because the closest you'll ever be with that person of being on the same page is the moment you leave the room. And every moment after that, you're just drifting farther and farther apart regarding your recollections of what happened and what didn't happen. And those are being biased by what happened since then to each of you, and based on your own self-interest. So you can confirm, you can get some confirmation. And if they're going to say, no, that's not our understanding, better to know that now than later. It also allows you to sort of reframe the situation if you didn't frame it well in the room. Sometimes you walk out of a room and you say, man, I think we came across as too desperate. We didn't even mention that we're talking to these other people. Or we came across too aggressive. And it allows you to sort of reframe and use some more language around what your perception of the situation is. And the third benefit is you can get more information. Sometimes you walk out of a room saying, we forgot to ask them this. We don't even know who's supposed to be reaching out next. We don't know what the process is. So for all these reasons, small tweak, get into the habit of reaching out to people over email or some such thing after you're done with the negotiation to make sure you're on the same page, make sure you're framing the negotiation in the way that you want, and that you can get more information. Last point. I do not allow any of my clients to, in any negotiation that I've ever been, to lie. I'm a huge proponent of telling the truth always. 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 That is not the same as saying every time we walk into a room, we tell them everything we know. Say, this is the most we'll ever be able to pay, and here's the thing, and here's how much money is in my wallet. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about not lying. And the reason is, first, it's the right thing to do. It's not fair, I think, to say, well, where we're negotiating, so that's different than how we are in real life. Or that was a deal. This is your real life. This is what you're doing. And incidentally, if you're sitting in this room, or if you're on CNBC.com and you're watching this, or wherever else you might be live streaming it, I don't know if Fink is doing as well, I'm pretty sure that there's nobody in this room, or anybody who's watching this thing, who can't afford to be more ethical. There are people out there who don't have very much. None of those people are in this room. So everybody here has the ability to just be more ethical when it comes to these things. And at least in my experience, people don't lie because they're slimy people. They often lie because they're not prepared. They're not prepared to answer the tough questions. Or they're impatient. They want to get somewhere sooner, whether that somewhere is success or somewhere is farther in the deal process. I always have to remind people on our side, not because they're worse people than I am, I have the same temptations. You got to step back and you got to make sure you're being honest. And every great negotiator I've ever met, in business, in diplomacy, people that I really think of as effective negotiators, I think every one of them would tell you they guard their credibility with their life. If they say they're going to do something, they will, walk over coals to make sure they do it. And if this hasn't happened to you yet, I assure you, somewhere along the way in your journeys as deal makers, as negotiators, there will come a day when the only leverage you have in a negotiation is your credibility. It'll be the only reason somebody's willing to sit down with you. It will be the only reason they're willing to take the risk you're asking them to take. You have no other leverage except they think you're credible. They know you're honest. They know you're saying it and you mean it. They know they can respect or trust you. And when that day comes, you'll be even more glad that you didn't end up letting these things slide. Because most people, I don't want to get all preachy here, but since it's item number 22, why not? Most people don't lose their credibility by one, histrionic act of backstabbing that they did that everybody heard about. Usually people lose their credibility and they lose their reputation a little at a time. You said something you didn't end up doing it because it was inconvenient. You said earlier in the deal process, this is really important, you can't not have this, but later on you ended up making that concession. And now they're like, wait a second, how do we ever know what you mean? So you have to be very, very mindful of it. And I don't know where to draw the line except always. Because anytime you draw the line anywhere else, then there's no accountability even to yourself. So that's 22 tweaks. I was told I had 40 minutes, and I hope that's actually true. Because if it's true, then we're within time. and if that's not true, then we've taken somebody else's time. We're going to stop here. These are things that I'm not assuming. I'm assuming most of you are actually pretty good negotiators. I don't walk into a room like this thinking, here's people who don't know anything about negotiation. I actually assume the opposite. I assume most of you are very good negotiators. Some of you may be amazing negotiators. But I also think that every one of us could be even better. And so if we talk about 22 things and you find one thing that you find, oh, I never thought about doing it that way, or I should talk to my team about it, I think this will be time well spent. And I'm going to stick around after this session, and I'm going to stick around, I think you have a reception today at 5. I'm going to try to be there as well, and I'm happy to have any conversations you want about any of this. Good luck in your future negotiations. I hope you found something of value.